just go around, and if you want to put your email address or a message down, you can do so. So Anthony Barnes, can I just borrow you? I know you've got that beautiful sign over there. You're more than welcome to come and rest it up against here, seeing that you've only got two hands. Do you want to come up here and put that there? And I'll give you this. So please write down anything you want, any messages that you want for Bob, anything that you want. Take up as much room as you want. We've got plenty of paper. And yeah, there you go, when he comes around. I would like to invite Professor Flint from the CanDo organisation to come and address you. You're going to be very, very inspired by this man, and I'm sure he won't mind if he's going to be recorded, because his message is pretty dynamic. So thank you very much, and put your hands together for Professor Flint.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Jacques. And thank you, Paul, too, for reviving this very important issue of direct democracy. You know, I know quite a few people, but I don't know anybody, I haven't met anybody who believes that this government and the last government is not the most incompetent government in the history of our Commonwealth. If there's anybody who believes that this government is the most wasteful in the history of our Commonwealth, I have yet to meet him. And if there's anyone around who believes that this government is the most duplicitous in the history of our Commonwealth, I, again, have yet to meet him. But how on earth did we come to this situation? The founders of this country gave us one of the finest representative democracies in the world. When one of the 6 or 7 oldest democracies, how did it happen? It happened because the institutions of our democracy have been taken over by the factional power brokers, especially of the Labour Party, but not only of the Labour Party, and they've gone ahead with an agenda of the intellectual elites who've marched through our institutions, the media, through some of the courts, through the universities, and through some of the schools, so that the common sense, the good judgment, and the decency of the ordinary Australian people are being avoided. And you just look at the policies that they've introduced. They've introduced, for example, as you know, they inherited a surplus, and they've turned it into one of the biggest debts we've ever had. It'll take so long to pay it off. They're so greedy that although they said they wouldn't touch your superannuation, they would not touch your superannuation. They've touched your superannuation on 9 occasions, and they've taken $8 billion out of your superannuation. And they've also attacked private property. They've introduced rules in relation to private property up and down the coast, so that, for example, a farmer on the north coast of New South Wales, if he lets his land go fallow, if he lets a field go fallow, has to put in a development application to the local council to use it again for the same purpose. We know that they are turning all sorts of farms into carbon sinks, and that wasn't only this government, it was the previous government. Remember Peter Spence, who climbed up into the tower and threatened a starvation diet? He was affected by the federal government, the Howard government, entering into a deal with the New South Wales government to turn his land into a carbon sink and make it useless. They are attacking your private property. They've so twisted the criminal justice system that the pendulum has worked away from the victims and it's moved in favour of the accused, and in particular the guilty. They've changed all sorts of things. They've made Australia very different than what it ever was intended to be. And how have they done this? They've done this by compromising our democratic institutions. The factional power brokers in the 2 parties have effectively done this. They've entered into an arrangement with the elites to introduce agenda items which you would never agree to, which would never pass what Alan Jones calls the pub test. And how have we got to change this? We heard from Paul the introduction of the bill by Senator Madigan. We've got to be like Switzerland. We've got to be like 27 American jurisdictions where there is power in the people to make the politicians accountable. You know that the politicians say they're accountable to you every 3 or 4 years. But you also know that to an extent the elections are confected because many of the candidates are chosen not because they're the best people, it's because they are loyal to whatever factional power broker is in control of that part of the party. Tony Abbott is a very decent and principled man. I've worked with him. He's a very good man. He will be a breath of fresh air in the next government. But there has to be power in the hands of the people to control future politicians.
Yeah.
You know that you were told by Kevin Rudd that he was a fiscal conservative, and the suggestion was that he would lead the government of Australia in a not too different way from the Howard government. And you know how much that got out of hand. You know, for example, in relation to building the education revolution, in which the present Prime Minister was the education minister, you know that several $1 billion were just lost by the government in contracts which they should never have entered into. You know that they established their own inquiry, which had no power to summon witnesses, no power to produce documents, which was run by a person close to the government, and even they found $1.5 billion thrown away of your money. And this is happening all the time. Government is about waste, and they have to control their waste. The only way to control them is by the people exercising the power which they have, for example, in Switzerland. And this is done by giving the people the power to petition for a vote on whether a government should be recalled, to petition for a vote on whether a specific piece of legislation should be repealed, and also the right to petition on proposing their own law, the law that the people want. Well, this happens in Switzerland, it happens in 27 American jurisdictions, it happens in British Columbia, in Canada, and it makes the politicians accountable. Not accountable every 3 or 4 years, but accountable on every day of every week, of every month of every year, just as you are in your jobs. All of us are accountable. Why shouldn't they be accountable? Now, the only way that this is going to happen is by enormous pressure from the public. We have an organisation, CanDo.org.au. I do encourage you to have a look at that site and to support the proposal for direct democracy. If we can persuade a government that now is the time to have a convention, to settle the terms of referenda to go to the people, we can introduce into Australia what is common in other countries. For example, in the United States, they don't leave the selection of politicians to the political parties so that the factional power brokers, the Messrs. Obeid and others decide who's going to be the candidate in the elections. This is done by primaries, open primaries of Democrat or Republican supporters who decide on who the local candidates should be. We've been left behind in our democracy. In 1891, Charles Kingston, who was the Premier of South Australia, proposed that we have a power in our constitution. As they were drafting the new federal constitution, he proposed that there be a power for 20,000 Australians to petition the Governor-General so that there could be a referendum on any new bill passed by both houses of Parliament. It never got into the Constitution because the politicians didn't like it. But we can do this if there's enormous pressure in this year. People are fed up with what's happened. They regret that in New South Wales and Queensland they've elected governments who are still going ahead with coal seam gas mining on prime agricultural land. They're still going ahead on coal seam gas mining on urban land, and they're still putting it into water catchments. And people are worried that if they elect a new government, that this can happen. And this mustn't happen because the people should be in power. The theme of this is going to be in a book which will be published in the middle of this year, perhaps before the next election, hopefully after the next election, because we all hope it will be sooner than that. But the theme of the book is Give Us Back Our Country. Give us back our country. I'm sorry I didn't hold the microphone. I'm sorry I didn't hold the microphone close enough to my mouth, but that is the important thing. Go to CanDo.org.au, go on Alan Jones and 2GB and argue for this. Support the Democratic Labour Party and the Christian Democrats and Bob Katter's party are all supporting, as I understand it, direct democracy. It's the only way we can deal with this. The government must change, of course, but we, the people of Australia, must exercise our control over the politicians. And the theme which should go to the power brokers and to the elite should be, give us back our country.
Yeah.